Okay, welcome everyone to this Bible study on the book of Nehemiah. We're working through a chapter of a time, just taking a sample of the verses and unpacking the key themes that come out of those and that come out of the whole chapter, hopefully giving a sense of the flow of the book as well to enrich your personal reading. We are going to be studying today the chapter of Nehemiah 4, and we're going to read verses 10 to 18 and then have a discussion about the verses. So let's begin by reading through from verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall." Also, our enemies said, "Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we'll kill them and put an end to the work." Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, "Wherever you turn, they will attack us." Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes." When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. And from that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. So quite a lot to take in from those verses, but I guess in summary, the people who are doing the rebuilding work, they're facing internal discouragement, external opposition, and Nehemiah's challenge is facing both of those threats to the rebuilding, reconstruction project that is occurring with the walls. And so, Dr. John, just to help us get an understanding of what's going on here, what do we know about the opposition they're facing, and why are they discouraging and attacking?
The key figures really in opposing the Jewish people here in rebuilding the walls were Sanballat, Tobiah and Geshem. Now Sanballat was a Horonite and Tobiah was an Ammonite. Now for that to really make sense, we need to know a little bit about the history of these peoples. The Horonites and Ammonites were two of the people groups that God had driven from the Promised Land when the Israelites came in there under the leadership of Joshua. So historically, they were the Israelites' enemies. Geshem was an Arab, most likely from the region south of Judah, and again his people had historically opposed the Jewish nation. And generations after Israel had first possessed that promised land, some of their old enemies were coming back, seeking to keep Jerusalem in ruins, causing trouble.
That's really helpful, Dr. John, and it really shows you just how the Old Testament, it's that ongoing story, isn't it? We can see these historic foes that we see all the way back in Joshua, but we see them again in Nehemiah, and how grasping one book more helps us understand the other. Pastor Fraser, what impact does that discouragement and that threat from the outside have on the people undertaking the building project?
Yeah, so they're discouraged, but they also are hearing, that there's now, it's gone from just mocking and kind of things that we saw in chapter 2, and it now becomes threat for people's lives. It becomes actual attacks that they're hearing. And to, I guess, kind of go off the back of what Dr. John was saying as well, like, it looks like Sanballat had kind of an administrative role over Samaria, which is an area that included the greater Jerusalem area. And obviously he is not now happy that that Nehemiah has come with the authority and the weight and the resources and also the protection, I guess, of the king. So he's not happy about that. You've got Tobiah, who is like the governor of the region, probably responsible for the overseeing of this territory. He's annoyed at Nehemiah's remarks. He's offended by him. And you've got Geshem, who's an Arab who with his son gained control over the confederation of the tribes and established their rule over this wide area. So, and one scholar points out that Nehemiah's activity, like the rebuilding of the walls, might have massively interfered with his myrrh and frankincense trade. So there's political motives, there's religious motives, there's materialistic motives. Like these guys are motivated. It's not just like, like this kind of bugs me a little bit. It's like the motivations for keeping these walls down, for discouraging the people, for attacking them is absolutely massive. And you can feel this kind of get to the people. And then also to add into it, like some of these people will have been the same people in Ezra who had already tried to rebuild the walls and it hadn't worked. And you almost get this sense of, it's happening again. So there's great discouragement happening. There's great opposition happening. And I just love the way that Nehemiah says, no, come on, fight.
Yeah.
Who's with us? The Lord our God's with us, Almighty God. It's just incredible,
Yeah, it's definitely a rousing speech that Nehemiah gives his people there, isn't it, Amy? I mean, you know, obviously Nehemiah, he's in this tricky scenario. You know, it's this huge project that he's undertaking. You know, he's got his people who are discouraged. He's facing these threats from the outside. I mean, it's not, you know, we couldn't say that Nehemiah was a battle-hardened, like, necessarily person. You know, he was previously from a palace as cupbearer. So what can we kind of take away from Nehemiah's response to the situation?
Absolutely. And you've sort of mentioned, you know, we've had, you know, this intensifying of threats, but then also it's interesting as well that we hear that Judah raised some concerns. And actually that's really important to note. You know, they mentioned that the strength of the laborers is failing. You know, there's too much rubble, there's this going on, there's that. And that was quite a concerning thing, because actually Judah was seen to be, you know, the strongest tribe. It was considered to be the bravest. You know, it was the tribe of great kings, and even the Messiah himself, you know, would come from this tribe. So that was quite a cause for concern. And I think in that moment, it would have been really easy for Nehemiah to feel overwhelmed, to act from emotion, to come up with excuses. But actually what we see in his response is, you know, he doesn't panic. He doesn't act defeated, but he encourages the people. You know, he reminded them of the faithfulness of God. He's reminding them that actually we're not just fighting for the war. You know, you're fighting for your loved ones, their wives, their children, their families, the future of their kingdom, the future of their kids. And actually this was so much more than just a wall. But also Nehemiah takes some time to comfort the people as well. You know, he says, do not be afraid. You know, he's sensitive to how the people of Jerusalem are feeling in this moment. And I think we can take a lot away from actually Nehemiah's very wise and I'd say calculated response in this moment.
I love that you hit on that theme of wisdom there, because, you know, in verse 12, it says that 10 times over, Jews who live near come and say, wherever you turn, they will attack us. This is not just a one-off discouraging comment. This is continuous time after time, facing discouragement. And Nehemiah's response, verse 13, he takes action. He stations people behind the lowest points. He does something. And then it says, after I looked things over, I stood up and I spoke to the people and encouraged them to live for courage. Laulu, this is a wonderful combination of wise action and encouraging people to trust God, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, looking at this situation and looking at Nehemiah, I think this is a prime example of, you know, seeing that faith without works is dead. You know, like you know, let's remember, you know, I guess the context of this. I mean, Nehemiah, he was, you know, an Israelite, but then he had to, you know, live and actually work under the king of Persia for so long. And, you know, when he was thinking back how he could help, you know, his people, you know, it was this book, Nehemiah, 15 years after the book of Ezra ends. It was almost almost 100 years after the first captives came back to the promised land with Zerubbabel, which is written in the previous book of Ezra. It's some 150 years after the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. So he had this conviction about this. He was like, I don't want to wait any longer. I want this done. I want this done really soon. And, you know, I want this to be done well. And again, you then get these threats, you know, you then get these guys then coming to say, we want to ruin, you know, all the works that God has commissioned you to do. And actually, I think it's safe to say that Nehemiah, he takes this personally. You know, he says, no, like the work of God will be done. Yes, he has the faith for it, and you know that's been shown in the previous 3 chapters. But now he then commissions people now, and he's like, actually, you know, I have faith. I'm going to be praying, and actually he inspires other people. It's not just about telling people what to do. He inspires them and says, you know what, now it's time to act. And actually, that's why I mentioned initially, like faith without works is dead. Then we see the works then come in. You know, he has faith, he prays, and he then doesn't just wait and say, oh well, whatever happens. You know, we then see that the people, you know, through like, I guess the instructions of Nehemiah, you know, they then start to take action. You know, they then like strengthen the defenses. You know, they then while doing this as well, keep on working as well. So I think again, it just shows the practicalities of again, like Nehemiah, he was a man of faith, but also he was a man of conviction in action, and I think it shows really clearly in these verses.
And his faith, it inspires me because everyone else has panicked, and maybe there's a leadership lesson that you could draw out of there, or just a lesson on how we should be as Christians. Christians, like, everyone else has panicked. Nehemiah, they're going to kill us. And it was right. In one sense, it was a very true and real threat that was happening. But Nehemiah stays calm. He stays collected. Yeah. And what does he do? He makes a plan. He stations people. He's wise with his resources. And then he gives this rousing speech, which kind of shows what's behind this. It's not that he's like in his, we're doing this in my strength, or we're doing this in our own strength. But it's like, don't be afraid of them. Remember what? The Lord, who is great and awesome. Yeah. And actually with him, come on, we can fight for our families. We can fight. And he reminds them of the why. And I think it's so rousing because it's like, actually, it identifies, I hear what you're saying, but don't forget who's for you. Don't forget who's fighting for you, who's fighting with us, and who's really ordained this work. It's not King Artaxerxes, it's the King of Heaven who's really called us to this.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Actually, that their circumstances may have changed. The enemy's threats that may have intensified. Issues have arisen, but actually God has stayed the same, and actually that's who we put our trust in, and not to focus on the discouragement around, but focus on God's plan and who's the person that's really in charge.
So good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn in terms of our own faith, because, I'm sure we can all relate to Nehemiah in a lot of ways. We take on something big, we think, okay, this is what God has set before me to do. And then we face opposition of some kind. We face discouragement. Maybe it's not, maybe it is like other people that are a part of that with us, or maybe it's just internally we face discouragement. And I look at the speech that Nehemiah gave to his people. Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord who's great and awesome. Fight for your families, your homes. And I kind of think, okay, yeah, that's a wonderful speech to give others, but sometimes we need to give ourselves that self-talk, don't we? Actually like remembering that, we might face some opposition, but how great is the God that's with us? We have a reason to fight. We could talk a lot more about that, but let's move forwards a little bit. Ultimately, we see that these threats and these challenges that they're facing, Dr. John, it doesn't separate the people Nehemiah is leading, partially by Nehemiah's influence. It almost draws them together. They unite in the face of it. So why is that so important?
The idea of unity is throughout the scripture, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, the importance of being united together with God's power. Thinking about, going back to a time, recording 2 Chronicles chapter 30, going back to King Hezekiah. And we read here, in Judah then at that time, the hand of God was on the people to give them unity of mind, to carry out what the king and his officials had ordered, following the word of the Lord. And that's going back into the past. But this is just what the people, and the Nehemiah and the people were doing there. They knew that the hand of God was there upon them, the power of God. And they then had a unity of mind to carry out what God had wanted them to do. But it's interesting, he responded, he prays, so kind of the spiritual aspect, but also he does something about it, practical. There's a lot of parallels going back earlier on in the Old Testament, because the same kind of message God gave to Joshua. Joshua was taking the people of Israel into the promised land. He's saying no one will be able to stand. This is in Joshua chapter 1 verses 5 and 6. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And the same kind of message, you can paraphrase it. As I was with Joshua, I will be with Nehemiah. As God was with Nehemiah, he will be with us. He doesn't. God is the same forever, and what he does and his power and his love is the same now. And again, that message that God gave to Joshua: be strong and courageous, because you will lead the people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors. So, in other words, God had promised, and we can trust God's promises. The same thing with Nehemiah. So exactly the same idea. Be strong and courageous. God has said, we will build those walls that will be completed, and we can trust in Him.
Verse 15 is quite an understated verse, but I think a really insightful one. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot, this is just after the speech Nehemiah gave, and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. I find that so insightful to that idea of unity, because what you don't see in the book of Nehemiah is, oh, okay, you thought you were going to separate us and cause us to stop the work, and they get in a circle holding hands and say, isn't it great, we're all unified and together. No, like they just get on with it. They go back to work. They carry on with the assignment that God had given them to do and that they were a part of. I think that almost talks to the understated, humble but very powerful element of unity. Laulu, any comment to add to that idea of unity?
Yeah, I think again it kind of shows, united we stand, divided we fall. And I think again this was a clear case of this. And in this time it was really easy for these people to go on their own, and when they're on their own to get in their own feelings. And I say that because these are serious threats. These people, they could have been hurt by it. They after getting a threat, they can just go home and hide away. And reasonably, yeah, fair enough. You're protecting your own life. But I think actually we see that when again the people were inspired by Nehemiah, again it starts with one person, then another person would probably then have said, oh, actually, you know what, we can't do this. And then another, we can't do this. And I think it shows how invaluable it is to have people with a we can't do this attitude rather than people, as you say, just kind of thinking, oh, well, woe is me. And again, obviously, circumstances are tough, but I think we do see that you do have to face it with a fighting attitude. And again, it's just great to see that Nehemiah again starts this, but again, the people being united and the people being together helps with this. Again, if this was one person on their own, it's really easy to just fall away. But actually, with so many more, they can all stand together. And even some people who back then may have been like, oh, I'm not sure about it, and someone's like, no, it's fine, come on, let's go. That's the kind of attitude that we need. That's the kind of people we need to surround ourselves with. And I think that's the kind of people that we're here trying to rebuild these city walls in Jerusalem.
Anyone can talk the talk when it comes to unity and being committed, but when you come under pressure, that's when the substance is really tested, isn't it? Pastor Fraser, I want you to comment on verse 17, where it speaks of the people they did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Obviously, few of us are in a building project where we're being attacked physically, but living this side of the cross, what parallels does that have to living by faith today?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Ephesians, Paul tells us to put on the full armor of God and stand firm. And he doesn't say this for no reason. It's not just because, oh, this will be great in like a little, Sunday school message and they can do all the, the drawings and stuff. But actually because he says our struggle is not against, this is Ephesians, I think it's chapter 6, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. So our struggle is not against flesh and blood. So as you say, the application is not go out and buy like a sword and just be building a wall and doing this, but the reality is that as we're building for the kingdom, like as we are part of the house of God, as we're playing our part, as we're doing our roles, as we're living this life, it's for no reason is it that Jesus says, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. That tells me that they're going to try. That tells me that they're going to try and divide us. That tells me that, stuff's going to come in and different things, and that God will protect us, and we've got to stay unified and we've got to stay strong. And how do we do that? Well, it's by wearing the full armor of God. It's by having the sword of the Spirit that is the word. It's by having that helmet of salvation that actually every thought I have needs to be filtered through my beautiful, amazing salvation that I have through Jesus alone. So yeah, I guess the application for us today would be that as we're building in our lives, as we're building the playing our part, building for his kingdom, like actually there will be things that come against us. There will be opposition. Like the Bible is very clear that not everything is easy. Like Nehemiah is doing a good thing here. He's doing God's thing, but there's still opposition. And that's the same in our life. There will be challenges. And that's not a prophecy. It's just the reality of life. There will be challenges. There will be things we come up against, but by the grace of God, we can get through it. When we stand unified, when we keep working. I love that point that you drew out there, actually. Like we all return to the wall, each of us to our own work. Like everyone just kept working. They just got their head down. Like actually, to just keep going, to be put on the armor of God and continue to fight, but also continue to build for his kingdom. Don't give up.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was going to say as well, I think again, like that's really, I think good way to put it, that we have to, I think at the same time, battle and build. And I think what I was going to say is that what's really key is that people didn't have to do this on their own. I know that we've again said this numerous times, and I kind of highlighted the importance of unity. But I think it's quite clear, quite evident that people, they battled together. They put that plan in place. It wasn't just one person looking out; it was together. They battled together, but then also they were building together. So I think again, I was just going to highlight the importance again of doing that, not just on your own, but then realizing when you have a community of people that are standing with you, as the Israelites did, and you have God on your side. I mean, it's a win-win. So
that's a really interesting point, Laulu, as well, because in order to battle and build, you need strength. And actually, where do you get strength from? Well, our strength comes from the Lord, and actually to put our trust in him and to rely on his strength. And also as well, I loved what you said, Laulu, about actually being in community. Actually, we need to stand together and draw strength from each other as well.
Which is sick in the context, which is great in the context of the verses, because like the officers posted themselves behind all the people, like they were together. It wasn't that it was just one person doing this. It was everyone. It was people were set. And I guess that's church, isn't it? You're going through a tough time, well, we're with you. You're struggling with this, we're all fighting together. And you might be having this onslaught, well, we're gonna, when the trumpet blows, well, we're all running to that part of the wall to defend you. And that's church, and that's the beauty of community.
What a following on what Pastor Fraser was saying about the armour of God. I like what Paul's saying in 2 Corinthians, that the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Well, this is the power of God. That we've got these weapons, but they've got divine power. And they were building the walls. We'll be building the kingdom of God. We're involved in building work, but we're also involved in demolition work as well, because we're demolishing the strongholds of the enemy, of the evil one. It goes on to say, Paul says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Now, in Nehemiah's case there were people setting themselves up against God, really. Because God said, do that work. They were opposing God. And Paul's saying the same thing here. There's arguments that set themselves up, not just against us, but against the knowledge of God.
Brilliant.
And we demolish those. We have the power, we have the authority to smash them down. It's interesting, with the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. And I always just get the impression of being attacked. But how many armies carry the gates with them? I'm going to attack that, I'm going to carry the gates with me. No, it's the other way around. The gates, when the gates won't prevail, it's the church on attack.
Come on.
The gates are attacking the kingdom of Satan, and Jesus has the victory. He already has the victory. He's not going to win it in the future. He has it now. When we demolish, what do we use? The weapons, like in the armour of God and whatever, they have the divine power, and we're in the demolition business.
Wonderful. What a brilliant note to finish up on. Thanks, guys. That's Nehemiah chapter 4.